first time you see her, it isn't in a cathedral or on a gold altar. It's in a Nigerian street market, heat shimmering off corrugated roofs, where a small plaster statue of Mary has been shoved behind. A butcher's stall like an afterthought. Her face is grayed with soot. A fly crawls across the curve of her painted lip. Fresh blood from a goat's throat runs in a thin ribbon, sneaks under the table, and darkens the dirt near her feet. And yet someone has placed a single white bead beside her. One bead, like the first word of a prayer. A boy notices it and laughs. "How can a holy mother sit next to rotten fish and goat guts?" he says. But an old woman, tired hands, strong eyes, leans down anyway. She wipes Mary's cheek with the edge of her wrapper, one slow stroke, and the soot smears like ash after a fire. The fly lifts off. The old woman doesn't look disgusted. She looks stubborn. Then she whispers, almost angrily, as if answering an invisible insult. "Mother, you stayed." That's the contrast. That's the scandal. A girl from a forgotten village in the 1st century, no throne, no army, no public speeches, somehow becomes so beloved that even when the world is sweaty and bloody and loud, people still make room for her. In Nigeria, in the noise, in the dust, in the mess. So who was she, really? And what kind of enemy does a woman like that even have? Because Mary's greatest rival was never another woman with prettier robes. It was the empire's favorite weapon. Fear. Fear that shames. Fear that silences. Fear that says, stay small, stay hidden, stay safe. And Mary, quiet, young, almost invisible, became the one person in her story who refused to kneel to it. Nazareth was the kind of place the world forgets on purpose. Not the glamorous, marble-faced cities where philosophers argued and coins changed hands with polished smiles. Nazareth was dust, olive trees, stone houses that held heat like grudges. A village tucked in the hills of Galilee, small enough that if you shouted a secret at one end, it could arrive at the other end before the echo died. To understand Mary, you have to feel the pressure of that place. Because Galilee wasn't just poor, it was watched. Rome's shadow stretched across the region like an iron net. Soldiers marched on roads built for speed, roads that could bring orders, taxes, and punishment faster than a village could gather its courage. And nearby, not far from Nazareth, there were cities that glittered with a different promise. Wealth, entertainment, the smug confidence of people who thought they'd chosen the winning side of history. One of those cities, Sepphoris, sat close enough that you could almost taste it. A Roman-friendly showpiece. Fine stonework. Busy markets. The kind of place that smelled of perfume, not sweat. To a girl growing up in Nazareth, Sepphoris wasn't just a city. It was temptation. It was the rival voice that said, "Look how small your life is. Look how powerless you are. Come closer to the lights. Be someone important." And in the 1st century, that voice didn't just whisper, it hummed. It sang. It wore jewelry. Mary's story begins in the space between those two worlds. Dust and glitter, faith and fear, quiet obedience and loud compromise. We don't have a camera recording her childhood. What we have is a human pattern, repeated across centuries. Children shaped by the hopes of parents, the dangers of their era, and the prayers they inherit before they can even spell them. Ancient Christian tradition gives names to Mary's parents, Joachim and Anne, and paints them as devout people who wanted a child so badly it felt like hunger. Whether you take that tradition literally or hold it as a window into how early believers understood Mary, the meaning is the same. She was not imagined as a girl who drifted into holiness by accident. She was imagined as a girl formed by longing, hers and her family's. Picture a home where prayers were not decorative. They were survival. A family in Galilee would rise with the light. Work would begin immediately. Water carried, grain ground, bread shaped. Hands would crack in the dry air. Bodies would learn endurance young. But faith wasn't separate from that life. It was stitched into it. Blessings spoken over meals. Psalms murmured while walking. Stories repeated until they became part of a child's inner voice. And a girl like Mary, young, observant, living in a place where everyone noticed everything, would learn early what it costs to be different. Because Nazareth was not the kind of village that applauded unusual people. It was the kind that measured you, tested you, and kept your reputation in a tight fist. In that kind of place, fear is social currency. Fear of gossip. Fear of being seen wrong. Fear of bringing shame on your family. Fear that one mistake will stick to you like tar. And that's where Mary's enemy begins. Not as a soldier, not as a king, but as a slow poison in the mind. Don't risk anything. Don't stand out. Don't invite trouble. You can almost imagine Mary as a teenager walking the narrow paths between stone walls, hearing distant laughter from people who wanted easier lives, feeling the tug of Sepphoris in the air like music on the wind. The rival city offering shortcuts. Rome offering peace, but always with a blade behind its back. And then, in the middle of all that, the first twist of her story is how ordinary she is. No heroic training montage. No prophecy scroll she unrolls with dramatic flair. No public declaration. Just a girl living a small life in a watched land. And that's exactly why what happens next hits like thunder. Because fear expects you to react in predictable ways. Fear expects you to hide. Mary's story is about the moment she doesn't. Before that moment, the world around her is already tightening. The political atmosphere is unstable. People in Galilee know how fast violence can erupt. Bandits, rebels, Roman crackdowns, local power plays. In such a place, the safest person is the person who stays unremarkable. And Mary is, by all appearances, unremarkable. Which makes her the perfect stage for the kind of divine interruption that never asks permission from your plans. But even before the interruption, there are hints, tiny, human hints, that Mary's inner life runs deeper than her village can see. Think of a girl who listens more than she speaks, not because she's timid, but because she's paying attention. A girl who learns to hold her thoughts the way you hold water in your hands, carefully, without spilling. A girl whose faith is not flashy, but stubborn. There's a particular kind of strength that grows in people who don't have control over the world around them. They learn to control what they can. Their will, their choices, their yes and no. That is Mary's real battleground. Not a throne room, but the private space where a person decides what they will belong to. And now, the next element of the story slides in like a door opening. Quiet, but irreversible. Betrothal. In that culture, betrothal wasn't casual dating. It was a binding promise, socially and legally heavy. It involved families. It involved reputation. It involved the future. Joseph enters Mary's life not as a romantic fantasy, but as a solid, practical reality. A man with hands shaped by labor. A man in the line of David by ancestry, tradition says. A man whose life, like Mary's, is defined more by duty than by drama. And here's where the rivalry sharpens. Because Mary is standing at the threshold of a predictable path. Marriage, children, a life inside the narrow borders of Nazareth's expectations. Fear loves predictable paths. Fear loves the script. And the rival city nearby, Sepphoris, Rome's shiny project, still whispers, blend in, stay safe, be normal. Don't become a target. But something in Mary's story will not allow normal. If you want to feel the tension of her youth, imagine the social trap she's in even before anything miraculous happens. She is young. Her reputation is fragile. Her village is small. Her body is not her own, in the sense that it is policed by community standards. Her future is already being negotiated by customs bigger than her. And yet the Christian memory of Mary preserves one repeated idea. She is not passive. She is not merely used by God like a prop. She is chosen, but also choosing. That distinction matters because it's the seed of why people later call her blessed and why devotion to her can feel so personal. She represents a human yes spoken under pressure. Now comes the moment tradition places like a knife edge in the story, an announcement, an encounter. Some call it the Annunciation. But strip the church language away for a second and feel how terrifying it would be in real life. a sudden presence, a message that shatters the script. If you've ever had a moment where your entire life forks in two, one side safe and familiar, the other unknown and dangerous, you can understand the shape of that moment, even if you don't share the theology, because the first emotion in that scene is not sweetness, it's disturbance. It's the shock of being seen. Not the way a neighbor sees you while judging your clothes, but the way a gaze might pierce through your excuses and touch the raw center of you. The kind of seeing that makes people step back, because it feels like exposure. And then comes the impossible claim that Mary will carry a child whose identity will shake history. Here's the part many people skip too quickly. In a village like Nazareth, an unmarried pregnant girl is not greeted with soft background music. She is greeted with suspicion, with shame, with consequences. This is where the hook's disgust finds its mirror in the ancient story. Because pregnancy is physical, messy, bloody, risky. In the 1st century, it can be deadly. There is nothing sanitized about it. No modern hospitals, no antibiotics, no easy rescues. So when the story says Mary accepts this calling, it is not asking you to imagine a halo floating over a pastel painting. It's asking you to imagine a teenage girl accepting a future that could get her ostracized, or worse. And that's why fear is the rival. Fear steps forward with 1,000 arguments. You'll be labeled. You'll be ruined. Joseph will leave. No one will believe you. Your own family will suffer. You could die. There are 2 kinds of courage. The loud kind that charges into battle with a sword, and the quiet kind that stays still while the world threatens you and chooses the hard good anyway. Mary's courage is the second kind. In the Christian imagination, her answer isn't a shrug. It's a deliberate surrender of control, and that is the first major twist. The most powerful yes in the story comes from the person with the least worldly power. But notice something else. The enemy doesn't come crashing in immediately. The story isn't finished with her youth yet. It wants you to sit in the suspense of what happens next. Because acceptance is not the same as ease. After the announcement, the real battle begins. The human battle. The social battle. The relational battle. Mary has to walk out into the same village streets. She has to face the same eyes. She has to live inside her own body as it changes, knowing what people will assume. And now Joseph becomes more than a character. He becomes a pivot. Because the rivalry isn't only external, it's intimate. Mary's future depends on whether Joseph will believe what sounds unbelievable. If he rejects her, she becomes a cautionary tale. If he accepts her, he becomes a shield. In their world, his decision can be the difference between survival and exposure. And tradition holds that Joseph, too, is drawn into the mystery, not without struggle, but with a kind of reluctant, steady courage that matches Mary's quiet strength. What you have here is not a fairy tale romance. It's a partnership forged under risk. Now, as her youth reaches its breaking point, the horizon darkens with the next threat. Power. Because when something extraordinary enters the world, it attracts attention. And attention attracts predators. Kings do not like rumors about new kings. Empires do not like whispers about a different kind of kingdom. The rival voice, fear, starts to recruit allies. Gossip, suspicion, political paranoia, the cold mathematics of rulers who protect their thrones with blood. And Mary, still young, still physically vulnerable, is moving toward the center of a storm she did not create. By the end of her youth, she is no longer merely Mary of Nazareth. She is becoming a symbol without asking to be one. An ordinary person carrying an extraordinary claim, walking into a world that eats claims like that alive, and far away, in halls where power sits fat and guarded, another kind of rival begins to stir. A ruler who will hear rumors and smell, threat, and respond the way threatened rulers always do, not with debate, with violence. The story has not yet reached that violence, but you can feel it approaching, like thunder you hear before the rain. And Mary, still a girl from a dusty village, is already learning the first brutal lesson of her life's path. If you carry hope, the world will try to crush it. sometimes with a sneer, sometimes with a sword. The thunder doesn't wait politely at the edge of the sky. It rolls closer in ordinary footsteps. Neighbors who suddenly stop talking when Mary passes, eyes that linger a beat too long, mouths that tighten like tied knots. Nazareth is small enough that silence becomes a language, and Mary can read it. Her body begins to change, quietly at first, then undeniably. Morning nausea, the heaviness in her limbs, the strange, intimate knowledge that something is growing inside her, something she did not plan, something she cannot prove with logic, something no careful explanation will make safe. Fear loves moments like this. Fear is a prosecutor. It doesn't need evidence. It needs a story people are willing to repeat. And the story the village wants is the simplest one. Shame. So Mary does something that looks small, almost domestic, but it's the move of someone trying to keep her soul intact. She leaves. Not forever. Not as an escape. More like a strategic retreat from the gossip's teeth. She goes to the hill country to see Elizabeth. Elizabeth is older, much older, and pregnant against all expectations. That alone makes her house feel like a crack in reality, a place where the usual rules don't hold. And when Mary arrives, breathless from travel, dusty from the road, Elizabeth doesn't narrow her eyes. She doesn't ask for an explanation to chew on. She doesn't sniff for scandal. She welcomes her. That welcome matters more than people realize. Because here is the first deepening of Mary's coming to God. It stops being a private yes whispered in a quiet room and becomes something shared, recognized, confirmed in the eyes of someone else. Faith often dies when it's isolated. It survives when it's witnessed. In that house, Mary is not the girl people are talking about. She is a person inside a mystery, and it's there, inside that relief, that something erupts from her like a pressure valve finally opening. A song, not a gentle lullaby, a bold, dangerous song. Mary's praise isn't just, God is nice. It's more like, God is turning the world upside down. The proud will be scattered. The powerful will be pulled down. The hungry will be filled. If you listen closely, that song is a knife, because anyone living under Rome knows how risky it is to talk like that. Empires don't just punish swords, they punish ideas. They punish hope when it starts to sound like revolution. And here's the twist. Mary's coming to God isn't escaping politics. It's stepping into the most explosive meaning of them. She isn't joining a comfortable religion that keeps her safe. She's aligning herself with a God who threatens the world's usual hierarchy. That's why fear is still the rival. Fear hears Mary's song and hisses, "Be quiet. Do you want to get killed?" Mary doesn't get killed in that moment. Not yet. But her words plant a seed that will ripen into danger. She stays with Elizabeth for a while, long enough to breathe without feeling judged, long enough to build strength, and then she returns to Nazareth, where the air feels tighter. Now Joseph has to decide what kind of man he is. This is where you can almost see two roads splitting in front of him. One road is socially clean. Cut ties, protect his name, let Mary fall alone into the pit of shame. People would nod sympathetically. They would call him wise. They would say, he did what he had to do. The other road is dangerous. Accept her. Take the scandal onto himself. Become a target of whispers. Maybe even a target of suspicion. From authorities who don't like unusual stories. Fear offers Joseph the easy road. Fear says, save yourself. But something, call it a dream, call it a divine interruption, call it the impossible tug of grace, pushes him toward the hard road. He stays. And that changes everything. Because now Mary is not merely a girl with a secret. She is part of a stubborn two-person defiance against the village's hunger to ruin her. They become together a small rebellion, a household that refuses to let shame be the final word. That's the second twist. The miracle doesn't arrive with a choir. It arrives with a man choosing loyalty over reputation. But the story still isn't finished tightening the screws. Rome enters like a ledger, a decree, a census. a demand that people be counted and taxed and categorized. Empires love numbers. Numbers make people feel manageable. So Joseph has to travel, back toward his ancestral line, to Bethlehem. And Mary, heavily pregnant now, goes with him. Picture the road. Not a cozy travel montage. A long grind of dust and stones, feet swelling, back aching. The kind of journey where the body becomes your enemy. Where the sun burns your neck and the night air bites your bones. Where every stranger on the road might be harmless, or might not. And underneath all of that is the sick irony. Mary is carrying the child. Christians will call the Prince of Peace. Yet his arrival begins under the boot of imperial bureaucracy. The rivalry is now fully visible. The God of the hidden is moving quietly, while the empire clanks loudly, counting, controlling, demanding. They arrive in Bethlehem, and this is where the disgust of reality kicks the door open. There is no polished room waiting, no clean sheets, no soft lighting. The place is crowded. Too many people in too little space, the pressure of bodies, the smell of sweat and animals. A stable, a cave, a corner where livestock are kept, somewhere warm enough to keep living creatures alive at night. Birth is not pretty. It is blood. It is pain. It is fluids and raw breath and trembling legs. It is the body's brutal honesty. It is a woman gripping the edge of something and trying not to drown in her own suffering. Mary gives birth there, in a place that smells like manure and damp hay, in the soundtrack of animals shifting and snorting, in a corner of a world that would not make room for her. And here's the strange, almost offensive contrast. This is where Christians say, God enters, not in the palace with marble floors, but in the filth-adjacent corner of empire. If you want the real shock, it's this. The divine does not avoid the disgusting parts of human life. It passes through them. Mary wraps the baby as best she can. She lays him where animals feed. And then the first witnesses arrive. Not the powerful, but shepherds. Men who smell like outside, who are often treated as unreliable, and who live near the margins because that's where their work keeps them. They come wide-eyed, talking too fast, claiming they saw something. Light, messengers, a proclamation. Mary doesn't interrupt them to correct the details. She doesn't demand they make it sound more respectable. She listens. She stores it. This is Mary's spirituality in action. She holds the mystery without needing to control it. She is not the main character on a stage. She is the keeper of meaning in the quiet. But you don't get to introduce a rival kingdom into the world without waking up an enemy. And now we meet him. Not a demon with horns, not a cartoon villain, a real kind of evil, a paranoid king, Herod. Herod is the type of ruler who decorates his cruelty. He builds beautiful things, holds impressive courts, and kills when he feels threatened. He is a client king under Rome, a man who survives by proving he can keep order, and order to him means no surprises. Then rumors reach him. Wise men from the east asking about a newborn king. A newborn. Do you feel the absurdity? A baby with no teeth becomes a threat to a throne guarded by soldiers. That's what fear does to power. It makes it ridiculous and deadly. Herod plays polite at first. He gathers information. He smiles the way predators smile when they're deciding where to bite. He asks questions, feigns interest, sends the visitors on their way, pretending he only wants to worship too. But worship is not what he wants. He wants control. And control, when threatened, becomes massacre. This is the moment the story swerves from poor but holy birth into something darker, more violent. The rivalry stops being symbolic. It becomes physical. Because if Herod cannot identify the child precisely, he can do what tyrants have always done. Widen the net and let blood do the sorting. The command goes out. Children in Bethlehem, boys, small enough to be possible matches, become targets. Try not to romanticize this. Imagine mothers screaming. Imagine tiny bodies. Imagine soldiers doing what soldiers do when a king says, "Handle it." It is one of the most sickening scenes in the entire Christian story, and it belongs here for a reason. It shows what the enemy really is, not just Herod. The enemy is the system of fear that convinces people to kill innocents to protect status. And here comes another twist. Mary and Joseph don't win with a miracle blast that knocks soldiers down. They win by running. A warning comes. Again in a dream. Again in that strange language where God seems to speak in the night to people too small for the empire to notice. And they leave. Quickly. Quietly. No grand farewell. No heroic music. They take the baby and disappear into the road. Flight to Egypt. Now the Holy Family becomes what countless people become across history. Refugees. This part matters because it reveals Mary in a new way. Her coming to God is not a single spiritual moment. It is an ongoing commitment under worsening conditions. Faith, here, means waking up and moving your feet when you'd rather collapse. It means keeping a child alive when a king wants him dead. It means swallowing pride, accepting help, sleeping in unfamiliar places, trusting strangers, living on the edge of survival. Egypt is not a postcard destination. It's foreign. It's different language and customs. It's the ache of displacement. It's Mary nursing a baby while listening to unfamiliar voices outside the door, wondering which ones are safe. And still, she stays in the story. She doesn't abandon it. She doesn't say, "This is too much, God." This is where Mary becomes, for many believers, not just a holy figure but a human one, a mother who knows what it is to fear for her child's life. If you want to know why devotion to her becomes fierce in places with hardship, places where people worry about violence, instability, loss, this is one of the roots. Mary is not portrayed as untouched by danger. She is portrayed as walking through it. Eventually, word comes that Herod is dead. The immediate predator is gone, but predators leave ecosystems of fear behind them. Returning doesn't mean safety. It means a different kind of vigilance. Joseph aims for Judea, but another ruler, Herod's son, sits there, and the air still tastes like threat. So they settle back in Galilee, in Nazareth again, choosing the quieter edge over the political center. And now, Mary's life becomes something the world rarely celebrates. Years of ordinary labor with an extraordinary secret. She raises a child who grows the way all children grow, hungry, curious, stubborn. He learns to walk, falls, cries, laughs. Mary bandages scraped knees. She teaches him prayers. She watches him start to understand the world. There is a scene that crystallizes her role. The presentation at the temple. They bring the child to Jerusalem, to the heart of religious life, to a place where incense clings to stone and people move with ritual gravity. And there, two old prophets, Simeon and Anna, recognize something. Simeon blesses the child, and then looks at Mary in a way that doesn't feel like comfort. He tells her, in essence, that this story will cut. A sword will pierce your soul. That line lands like cold metal. It's prophecy as warning, not as flattery. Mary's coming to God, again, deepens. Not as a warm glow, but as the acceptance that love will cost her, that her motherhood will not be the safe kind, that her son will draw conflict like lightning draws storms. And she doesn't walk away. Years pass. Then comes another moment, almost easy to miss if you're not paying attention. The boy at the temple when he is about 12. Mary and Joseph travel to Jerusalem for the festival, then head home with the crowd, only to realize he isn't with them. If you've ever lost sight of a child in a public place for even 10 seconds, you know how terror tastes. It tastes like bile, like panic, like your heartbeat trying to escape your ribs. Mary and Joseph search for him for days. And when they find him, he's not crying. He's not apologizing. He's sitting among teachers, asking questions, answering with unsettling clarity as if he belongs there. Mary's relief turns instantly into a mother's sharp anger. She speaks like any parent. "Why did you do this to us? Do you know what you put us through?" And his response is a pivot point. He speaks of being in his father's house, not Joseph's, not hers, his. This is another twist, quieter but profound. Mary begins to learn that the child she loves is not hers to possess. She is mother, yes, but she is not owner. She will have to let him belong to a mission bigger than her arms. And notice the rivalry again. Fear would love for her to clamp down, to control, to protect him by limiting him. But Mary doesn't. She keeps these things in her heart. That phrase isn't sentimental, it's survival. It means she carries unresolved tension without letting it destroy her. By now, her coming to God has fully shifted shape. It is no longer about a single miracle announcement. It is about living with uncertainty, raising a child under threat, holding prophecy like a heavy stone, and still choosing trust. And somewhere, like a shadow preparing to step into the light, the enemy is still gathering its resources. Not just the memory of Herod, not just the muscle of Rome, but the deeper hostility that rises whenever the world senses it might lose control. The coming collision between a kingdom built on power and a kingdom built on truth. Mary can't see the whole road yet, but she can feel its direction. The sword that Simeon mentioned hasn't struck, but you can hear it being sharpened in the distance. The boy Mary once chased through dusty lanes becomes a man who no longer fits inside any lane at all. It happens slowly and then all at once. One day she's still hearing the familiar sounds of Nazareth, tools biting wood, women calling to each other over water jars, the ordinary, gossip that hangs in the air like smoke. And the next day there's a different kind of talk, the kind that pricks the skin. He's left. He's gone down to the river. He's with that wild prophet. He's doing something. Mary doesn't need a messenger to explain what that means. She can feel it in the way the village breathes. Because when your son becomes public, he stops being only yours. He becomes a target, a symbol, a problem to be solved. And this is where Mary's conflict sharpens into something almost cruel. The calling that began with her yes now demands a second yes, one that hurts more. The first yes was to carry him into the world. The second yes is to release him into it. He goes out to be baptized, to step into the current of Israel's longing and frustration, into a country where religious purity is argued like court cases and Roman power sits like a boot on the neck. People have been waiting for deliverance so long that their hope has gone feral. It bites. It snaps at anything that moves. And when Jesus begins to speak, when he starts saying things that make the poor lift their heads and make the powerful tighten their grip, Mary hears it the way mothers hear storms before anyone else does. Not because she's paranoid, because she knows how fear behaves when it's cornered. At first, his ministry spreads like fire in dry grass. A few stories, a few healings, then a swelling crowd. People leaning forward as if they can drink life out of his voice. Fishermen leaving their nets. Tax collectors leaving their booths. Women watching from the edges because women always have to watch from the edges until someone finally sees them. And Mary, behind the scenes, becomes a different kind of witness. Not the star, not the manager, not the person who can steer the story. A witness, trying to hold steady while the world tries to swallow her son. Here comes the first big public moment where Mary steps into the frame, and it doesn't look like a saint moment. It looks like a human one. A wedding. You can smell it if you imagine it properly. Oil and bread, sweat and wine, laughter bouncing off stone walls, musicians scraping. Joy out of strings, women moving fast with trays, men talking loud with the confidence people get when they think tomorrow will be normal. And then the disaster. The wine runs out. That might sound small until you understand what it means in a shame-based culture. A wedding feast failing is not just a logistical problem. It's humiliation baked into memory. It's the kind of story people repeat for years with a smirk. Remember when that family couldn't even provide wine? Mary notices. Of course she notices. Mothers notice the quiet disasters before they become loud. She leans toward Jesus and says, so simply, so dangerously, there's no wine. It's one short sentence, and it carries an entire world inside it. Compassion for the embarrassed, impatience with avoidable shame, and a mother's instinct that says, you can do something. Jesus responds in a way that surprises people who want Mary to be only soft and silent. He pushes back. He draws a boundary. He essentially says, "This is not the moment you control." And here's the twist that makes Mary interesting. She doesn't panic. She doesn't argue. She doesn't collapse into offended pride. She turns to the servants and says the line that will become her spiritual fingerprint. Do whatever he tells you. That's not a mother ordering a son. That's a believer pointing to a mission. Then comes the miracle. Water turned to wine, ordinary jars becoming the container of something excessive, generous, almost scandalously joyful. And the wedding doesn't end in embarrassment. It ends in astonishment. But notice what Mary's role is. She doesn't perform the miracle. She doesn't take credit. She triggers a moment and then steps aside as if she's saying, "I won't be the spotlight. I'll be the doorway." This is where Marian devotion later finds one of its deepest instincts. Mary doesn't replace God. She points to him, and that threatens the rival. Because fear hates doorways. Fear wants everything sealed. Fear wants people trapped inside shame and scarcity and the belief that nothing can change. Mary's presence at Cana is not just maternal, it's confrontational. She's quietly confronting the kingdom of fear with a kingdom of abundance. As Jesus' preaching intensifies, the rivalry widens into a three-way collision: Rome, religious authorities, and the darker, whispering enemy that lives inside human hearts. Rome is blunt. Rome keeps order by violence and taxes and public humiliation. The religious elite are more subtle. They keep order by defining who is clean and who is unclean, who belongs and who is suspect, who is righteous and who should be pushed outside the circle. And the whispering enemy, fear, recruits them both whenever possible. Now imagine what it's like for Mary to watch the crowds gather. Crowds are never neutral. They can turn in a breath. One day they shout, "Blessed!" and press forward for healing. The next day they grow impatient, angry that the miracle worker refuses to become a political weapon. People want a Messiah who crushes enemies. Jesus keeps talking about loving them. That's not what furious, hungry hope wants to hear. Mary sees what the disciples, young, eager, sometimes intoxicated by attention, don't always see. Popularity is a trap. A crowd is a wave, and waves don't care what they drown. She watches her son touch lepers, people with skin like ruined parchment, people who smell like sickness and exclusion. She watches him speak to women publicly, which is already an offense to the social script. She watches him eat with sinners, which is the religious equivalent of walking into a courtroom and smearing mud across the judge's robe. And every time he does it, Mary can almost hear the click of gears turning in the minds of his enemies. Because his enemies aren't always evil in the cartoon sense. Often they are invested, deeply invested, in a system that gives them meaning and control. They can't defeat him by arguing about kindness. Kindness looks too good. So they do what power always does when it's losing. They change the accusation. They stop saying, "He is wrong," and start saying, "He is dangerous." That's when the pressure begins to close around Mary again. People start whispering about her too, because attacking a man's mother is an ancient tactic. If you can stain the source, you can stain the message. If you can turn Mary into a scandal again, maybe the whole story collapses under suspicion. And here's where another twist comes. One that stings. There's a moment when Mary and Jesus' relatives come looking for him while he's speaking, and the message is passed through the crowd. Your mother is outside. To many ears, it sounds like an attempt to rein him in. Like the family is worried he's gone too far. Like they're trying to pull him back from the edge. Jesus responds with a line that shocks. He redefines family. My mother and my brothers are those who do the will of God. If you listen too quickly, it sounds like rejection, like he's dismissing Mary. But the deeper cut is different. Mary is being asked to take a new place. She cannot cling to him through biology. She must belong to him through faith. Like every other disciple. That is humiliating in a strange way. Imagine being the person who carried him, fed him, protected him, ran with him through fear, and then hearing him publicly reframe your relationship as something wider, less possessive. This is Mary's third yes. She could pull away in resentment. She could say, "After everything I did?" But Mary doesn't become bitter. She becomes something rarer. A mother who allows her child's mission to change her identity. She shifts from mother of Jesus to disciple of Jesus, without losing the tenderness of being his mother. That shift is why she becomes so powerful later in Christian imagination, because she holds both intimacy and surrender, love and release. Now, as Jesus' ministry grows, the enemy evolves again. Herod was a blunt instrument. Kill the baby, remove the threat. But now the threat is not one infant in a manger. It's an idea spreading mouth to mouth. You can't stab an idea like you stab a body, at least not easily. So the new enemies aim for a slower assassination, character assassination. They accuse him of breaking Sabbath, of blasphemy, of being empowered by darkness, of misleading the people. They bait him with traps, taxes to Caesar, purity laws, authority questions. And Jesus keeps slipping the traps, not by being slippery, but by being too clear, too clean. Clarity is infuriating to people who survive on confusion. Mary, watching this, doesn't need to stand at the front to feel the heat. She feels it in the sideways glances, in the tightening social circles, in the way friends become cautious. She feels it in the way danger follows certain names through town like a shadow. She also sees the cost to the disciples. Fishermen turned into public figures, women who support the movement risking reputation, entire households disrupted because someone dared to believe the world could change. And this is where worship and proclamation enter the story, not as formal cathedral ritual, but as something raw, a new kind of people, forming around a new kind of kingdom. They gather in homes, they eat together, they pray, they tell stories, they sing psalms, they share what little they have. They practice a strange, stubborn solidarity. It's not worship as performance, it's worship as loyalty. This is important, because later, when Christians build churches and liturgies and processions, they are building on this first blueprint, a community formed around Jesus, where the poor are not treated as disposable, where women are seen, where sinners are not thrown away as hopeless. Mary is part of that ecosystem of devotion, not necessarily leading sermons, but present, enduring, watching, holding the story together as it threatens to tear. There's an almost cinematic detail to her presence that people forget. She is a woman in a male-centered religious world, and yet she remains close to the heart of the movement. That alone is a quiet rebellion. Now, as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, the tension becomes a cord drawn tight enough to snap. Jerusalem is not just a city. It's a religious engine, a political fuse. The temple is there, massive, symbolic, loaded with meaning and money. Pilgrims flood in. Roman soldiers watch from strategic points. Priests manage offerings. Leaders guard their authority like a treasure chest. In a place like that, a prophet who speaks about the coming of God is not a curiosity. He's a threat. And Mary knows what Jerusalem does to threats. She remembers Herod's hands reaching for children. She remembers running. She remembers prophecy about swords and souls. So when Jesus goes toward Jerusalem anyway, it feels less like a journey and more like walking toward a blade. He enters to crowds shouting praise, branches, chants, people dreaming again of political liberation. The same crowd energy that can lift you can also flip into rage when it realizes you are not giving it the kind of victory it demanded. Then he does something that makes the leaders go cold inside. He confronts corruption at the temple. He overturns tables. He disrupts the religious economy. He exposes the rot in public. It's the kind of act that makes powerful men stop smiling. From that moment on, the conflict stops being, will they accept him, and becomes, how soon will they destroy him? Fear, at this stage, is no longer merely whispered. Fear is organized. Fear wears robes. Fear writes plans. Fear holds meetings at night. They decide he must die, not because of one argument, because he cannot be controlled. And Mary, in the background, can feel the air change the way you feel a room change when someone decides violence is now an option. Here's a shocking, concrete way to picture what's happening. While Jesus speaks openly to crowds in daylight, his enemies whisper, in shaded courtyards, trading rumors like knives. One wrong sentence, one manufactured witness, one paid betrayer. And the machinery of execution can begin. Mary doesn't necessarily hear every detail, but she senses the trajectory. Mothers sense trajectories. And here comes the final twist of this part. Mary's power is not to stop the conflict. Her power is to refuse the enemy the one victory it wants most. The enemy wants everyone to abandon Jesus when fear spikes. It wants isolation. It wants the movement to collapse into self-preservation. It wants each disciple to say, "Not me." So Mary does the opposite of self-preservation. She stays near. As the circle tightens, as whispers become warrants, as night approaches with the weight of betrayal in it, Mary remains what she has been since the beginning. The steady yes inside a world that keeps screaming no, and that steadiness will matter more than anyone understands. Because once the arrest happens, once the violence begins, the story will demand the hardest kind of witness. Not the witness of miracles, but the witness of suffering. We're not there yet, but we are at the edge of it, toes over the cliff, feeling the drop in the stomach. The rivals have chosen their move. Fear is about to show its teeth in public. And Mary, who began in Nazareth as an almost invisible girl, is walking toward the darkest part of the road without turning away. Night comes the way it always does when people are about to do something they'll regret. Quietly, with the lamps lit low, with faces turned half away, with voices dropping into whispers so the conscience doesn't hear too clearly. Somewhere in Jerusalem a door closes, a purse changes hands, a plan becomes official, and then the machinery of fear, so patient, so experienced, starts to move. Jesus is arrested like a dangerous criminal, not because he stole, not because he killed, but because he refused to be owned. They drag him through the dark, through courtyards that smell like old smoke and sweat, into hearings that aren't really hearings. More, like rehearsals for a verdict already chosen. The disciples scatter. That's the first victory fear always tries to win. Isolation. Make everyone run. Make everyone pretend they never knew him. Make everyone choose survival over loyalty. And for a moment it works. You can almost hear doors slamming, footsteps fleeing down alleys, breath rasping in panicked throats. But fear doesn't get a clean sweep. It never does. Because Mary is there, not in the center of the mob, not giving speeches, not trying to fight soldiers with her hands. Her strength is older and colder than that. She stays close enough to see what happens. That alone is a rebellion. Imagine her moving through the night as news spreads, through crowded lanes, past torches, past men who look like they'd rather not meet her eyes. Imagine the weight in her chest as she realizes the thing Simeon warned about has finally stepped out of prophecy and into the street. In the morning, they parade him through public spaces like a warning sign. They dress him in mockery, robe, crown of thorns, the kind of joke that makes the powerful laugh because it proves they still get to decide what's ridiculous and what's sacred. The crowd isn't a crowd anymore. It's an animal. Some people are silent. Some are excited. Some are afraid to be seen caring. Some are angry because he didn't become the weapon they wanted. Some are eager to please the authorities. And some, this is the ugliest part, are simply hungry for spectacle, the way people will slow down to watch a crash even as they whisper, "That's terrible." Mary is watching all of it. Every flinch, every spit, every slap that lands with that dull, horrible sound flesh makes when it's hit. And here's the twist no one expects when they picture Mary as a holy statue. She cannot fix this. There is no mother's override switch. No, stop it, that's my child. That makes soldiers lower their weapons and suddenly discover mercy. Mary is forced into the most powerless role a mother can ever be given. Witness. They sentence him in the language of law, but it's the language of fear wearing legal clothing. They hand him over to Rome because Rome is good at one thing, making an example. Then comes the cross. Not a clean symbol, not jewelry, not art. An execution device designed to humiliate. The wood scrapes along stone. Splinters bite. Blood drips and turns the dust into sticky paste. The condemned man stumbles, gets yanked upright, stumbles again. The crowd presses in to see his face up close. And Mary keeps moving forward through that chaos the way you move through waves that keep trying to shove you back. She isn't immune to nausea. She isn't floating above the scene. She is a human being watching her son be destroyed in public. This is where the enemy changes tactics. Fear stops being a whisper and becomes an order. Look away. Save yourself. Don't be associated with this, because Rome doesn't only kill bodies. It kills reputations. It kills networks. It kills movements by poisoning anyone who stands too near. So the question becomes, who will remain when it costs something? Most of the men are gone. Not all, but enough that the absence is loud. And this is another twist, one that slices through centuries of comfortable storytelling. In the final stretch, it's the women who stay visible. Mary stays. Mary Magdalene stays. Other women stay. They stand close enough to hear his breath change. This is not sentiment. It's courage, the kind that doesn't get medals. At the foot of the cross, Mary finally meets her rival face to face, the full, obscene spectacle of power turning cruelty into entertainment. The empire wants her to break. The enemy wants her to collapse into despair so complete that faith becomes impossible. And then, in the middle of agony, Jesus does something that sounds small but changes everything. He gives Mary away. He looks at her and at one of the remaining disciples, John, and creates a new family inside the wreckage. Here is your mother. It's a mercy, and it's a blade, because it confirms the truth Mary has been learning for years. Her motherhood will not end in possession. It will end in surrender so deep it feels like being hollowed out. And still she does not flee. There's a moment, depending on how you picture it, when Mary's eyes meet his, not the soft gaze of a mother with a baby in her arms, but the fierce, devastated gaze of a woman whose love has outlived every illusion. A gaze that says, without words, I am here. I will not let you die alone. They raise him up. Nails go through flesh. The body jerks. Breath becomes a battle. Hours stretch. The sky seems too bright for such a crime. And then the end arrives with shocking simplicity. A final breath. A final surrender. The kind of silence that follows is not peace. It's the stunned hush after something irreversible. If you want to understand why Mary becomes Our Lady of Sorrows for millions, don't imagine a porcelain woman crying one elegant tear. Imagine a mother whose knees nearly buckle because grief is now heavier than her bones. They take the body down. This is where the story becomes unbearable in a way that religious art often tries to soften. A dead body is not a symbol. It's weight. It's slackness. It's skin cooling. It's blood drying dark. It's the smell of death beginning to rise. They place him in her arms, or close enough that she can touch him. And Mary's hands do what mother's hands do even when hope is gone. She holds him anyway. The enemy whispers its sweetest poison now. There, it was all for nothing. That is fear's masterpiece. Not pain, but meaninglessness. They bury him quickly because everything is urgent now. Sabbath approaching, authorities watching, danger still live in the air. A stone is rolled. The opening is sealed. The movement seems finished. And Mary goes home with a silence inside her that has no words. This is the place where many stories end. But Christianity claims the story does something much stranger than ending. Because on the third day, when grief is still fresh enough to taste, the sealed place doesn't stay sealed. The body isn't there. The rules don't hold. The first witnesses, again, are not the powerful. They are the ones history usually sidelines. They run with impossible news. He is alive. At first, even the disciples don't know what to do with it. Resurrection is not a comforting metaphor to them. It's an offense to common sense. People don't rise. Rome doesn't lose. Death doesn't reverse. And yet the fear that had scattered them begins to crack. Hope returns, not as a vague feeling, but as a shockwave. The rival, fear, starts losing its grip, because the thing it used as the ultimate threat has been confronted. If death isn't final, fear's favorite weapon is suddenly blunt. Now, Mary enters a new season of the story that is often quiet in the texts, but loud in the church's memory. She becomes part of the praying heart of the early community. After resurrection appearances, after the stunned joy, after the dizzying realization that the movement is not dead, the followers gather again. They hide, yes, because danger remains. But now the hiding is different. It's not only terror. It's waiting. It's listening. It's trying to understand what comes next. And Mary is with them. Think about what that means. The woman who carried Jesus into the world is now in the room as his followers become his body in the world. She is not outside the story looking in. She is inside it, praying, steady, the living bridge between this was real and this still is. Then Pentecost, wind and fire imagery, a birth scene of a different kind, erupts into their fear-locked room. The Spirit comes, and people who were hiding start speaking publicly. The movement turns outward like a door kicked open. Mary watches that too, not with surprise, but with the kind of calm you get when you've already survived the worst. Her life after that isn't painted in detail by the earliest writings, but tradition refuses to let her fade away. In Christian memory, she remains a mother to the community, present, prayerful, a sign that tenderness and strength can coexist. And then comes her own ending, told in the church's long remembering as a falling asleep, a passing that is not swallowed by oblivion. Some traditions speak of her dormition, Mary dying as all humans die, surrounded by the community, still trusting. Others emphasize what the church later calls the assumption, that she is taken into heavenly glory, not as a prize for being famous, but as a promise about what God intends for human life, body and soul, not discarded, not erased. In plain language, Mary's story doesn't end in a grave that the empire can guard. It ends in God's refusal to treat human love as disposable. That's why, over centuries, devotion to her grows, not because she competes with Christ, but because she's the human yes that stayed, intact through everything fear threw at it. Shame, exile, political violence, public execution, the temptation to believe suffering means meaninglessness. Now, here's the part that makes Nigeria make sense. Because if you zoom out and then back in, you'll see something startling. Mary becomes most intensely beloved not only in calm, wealthy places, but in places where life can feel like it's lived close to the edge, where mothers worry, where communities carry grief, where people are hungry for a faith that touches real wounds. Nigeria is one of those places, a country bursting with life, music, markets, families, humor so sharp it can slice despair, yet also a place where people know instability, corruption, communal tensions, and the ache of loss. In such a landscape, Mary doesn't land as an imported decoration. She lands as a recognizable kind of presence, a mother who understands, not a queen who floats above suffering, a mother who has walked through it. That is one reason she is revered. She feels close. She feels like someone you can speak to when your voice is shaking. But there's also history, and Nigerians have made Mary their own in a distinctly national way. In 1954, during the Marian year proclaimed by Pope Pius XIV, Nigeria's Catholic bishops formally entrusted the country to Mary under the title Our Lady, Queen, and Patroness of Nigeria. In 1960, as Nigeria gained independence, the country was consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary by the bishops, tying national identity, hope, and prayer together on a date that already carried enormous symbolic weight. Later, Nigerian bishops renewed that consecration publicly, including a major reconsecration in Benin City in October 2017, explicitly linking it to the earlier national dedication and to the urgent anxieties of the time. If you want the cinematic image of that devotion, don't picture quiet European chapels. Picture a Nigerian rosary procession, night air warm, streetlights flickering, generators humming in the distance, hundreds, sometimes thousands, moving like a river. Beads click softly in calloused fingers. Voices rise in response. Call and answer prayer, the words rolling like drum patterns. Mothers carry children on their backs. Young men walk with candles held carefully, so wax doesn't burn their hands. Someone begins a hymn and the crowd catches it, and suddenly the street feels like a sanctuary with no roof. Mary is in that street not as an idea, but as a rallying point. We are not alone, and the rival shows up here too. Because Nigeria, like every place, has its own marketplaces of power. Places where people are tempted to bargain with fear. Sometimes fear wears the mask of superstition. Buy this charm, do this ritual, pay this person, and maybe you'll be safe. Sometimes it wears the mask of cynicism. Nothing changes? Protect yourself? Only fools hope? Sometimes it wears the mask of raw violence. Stay silent or get hurt. In that marketplace, devotion to Mary can function like a counterspell, not magic but moral resistance. The rosary becomes a weapon not because beads are bullets, but because prayer reorganizes a person from the inside. It teaches patience. It teaches endurance. It teaches a kind of stubborn purity of intention. I will not be ruled by panic. That's why Marian devotion often grows in places with pressure. It trains people to stand when fear says collapse. And Nigeria doesn't only honor Mary in general. It has places where devotion becomes geographic, where prayer gathers so consistently, it reshapes the landscape. One of the most striking examples is the International Sanctuary of Jesus the Savior and Mother Mary in Elil, Rivers State, founded in 1985 as a pilgrimage center of Eucharistic adoration and special Marian devotion. It was later recognized at national level by Nigeria's bishops and, in 2020, elevated by the Holy See to an international shrine, reported as the first and only one of its kind in Africa. Pilgrims go there for retreats, prayer, and a kind of intense spiritual regrouping, like people charging their souls the way you charge a phone before walking back into hard days. And in Abuja, the very capital carries Marian identity in its Catholic heart through the Our Lady Queen of Nigeria Pro-Cathedral. Again, Mary's title placed right at the national center, not hidden at the margins. Then there are the rhythms that many Nigerian Catholics know by muscle memory. May devotions to Mary, October Rosary devotions, Marian. Sodalities and movements like the Legion of Mary, groups that do more than pray. They visit homes, care for the sick, teach, organize, and build community in neighborhoods where community can be the difference between coping and breaking. So when you ask, why is Mary revered in Nigeria? You can answer it without ever reducing it to a single reason. She is revered because she is strong without being cruel, because she is holy without being distant, because she is a mother who understands the price of love and does not shame people for being afraid. She simply teaches them not to let fear be king. And there's one more twist, maybe the most important. In many stories, the woman at the center is either powerless or triumphant. Mary is neither in a simple way. She is powerful precisely because she refuses the kind of power that looks like domination. She changes history without an army. She defeats the rival, fear, without becoming fear herself. She stands at a cross and doesn't become a hater. She becomes, for millions, proof that tenderness can survive brutality and still remain tender. That's why, when Nigerians kneel before her image, whether it's a polished statue in a church or a soot-stained figure tucked near a market stall, they aren't worshiping plaster. They're reaching for a story that tells them God enters real life, not sanitized life. They're reaching for a mother who stayed when staying was dangerous. And maybe, this is the quiet miracle still repeating, every time someone whispers, "Mother," in the middle of the mess, fear loses a little more ground.